African American Oral History in Prince George's County, Maryland. This is a series that explores and captures the rich and diverse contributions of noted African Americans. Each has a unique and personal story, all told in their own words.
My name is John J. Williams, and this is my oral history. I was born in Pitt County, North Carolina, and that's close to Greenville, North Carolina, where I grew up and went to school. In North Carolina, growing up was, we were during the time when blacks and whites were separated. We went to separate schools. The area was surrounded by tobacco plantations and cotton. So basically I grew up working in the tobacco fields and picking cotton. There were 6 of us in the family. My family had 4 boys and 2 girls, and I was the oldest boy. And we were quite active, I guess probably more in church than anything else. And I, of course, became a member of the Elks Club, which during the younger days, you know, we had activity for Elks, ELKS, and we socialized by dances, picnics, and activities that kept the young people out of trouble. So I wasn't in a lot of trouble. I was stayed on task and did good work in school, made good grades, and so social life was pretty good for me in terms of being with my family and friends. Growing up in North Carolina, my major interest was art. And of course we didn't have art at high school because the principal felt it was too expensive. And so we had our 5th grade teacher who organized the art. We had an art club. We used to meet at my house, and we actually brought art as part of the curriculum. So we did a lot of painting, and we had a lot of activities with the club, and socially, you know, I was part of a band, and they had a lot of activities with music. So it was we had a good social life with the high school kids and with the kids of our own race, but there was no mingling of the races of black and white. In fact, we had to walk to school while they rode the buses. I went to school all year long, from elementary to high school in Greenville, North Carolina. I graduated from Epps High School in Greenville, North Carolina. Greenville, as I said before, is a place where blacks and white were segregated. And blacks could not go to a restaurant unless you went to the back door. There were black and white signs at the bus station. I recall one of them, a community person who jumped in the city swimming pool, and they drained all the water out of the pool because of that incident and made it a parking lot. I graduated in 1951, went straight to Morgan State College in Baltimore, Maryland. Morgan was really a new life because I had left the rural of North Carolina and went to the city of Baltimore, and it was a new experience. But I gained a lot of information about life that I didn't know in North Carolina, and became very active with the student government, became editor-in-chief of the college newspaper, and I think was my first entry to being an activist. Because at Morgan was where we had to deal with the fact that we were in a community that had a theater, but the blacks could not attend the theater, and a drugstore with a restaurant, and you couldn't sit down and eat at the restaurant. And I had to organize a sit-down at the restaurant, which was Reed's Drugstore, and eventually had everybody to take their study periods at that restaurant until they finally transferred all the whites there and made Reed's Drugstore citywide open to all American, black and white. You know, church was always part of my upbringing from Greenville. I joined church when I was about 12 years old and continued there in Baltimore. My father was a deacon, and of course my stepmother there was a minister. So I've been very active with church all my life. At Morgan, becoming a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, I think that perhaps that was the beginning of my really getting to know what social life was, because I was a poor boy coming from North Carolina without a lot of income. In fact, when I became a member of the fraternity, I didn't have the fee, and my professor paid my fee for joining the fraternity. I started out majoring with English and journalism, as I thought, but I found out that Morgan didn't have a major in journalism, so I changed my major to French. So I got my bachelor's in French language and literature, and went on to graduate school later and got my master's in French language and literature. Well, I finished Morgan in 1955, and subsequently from that year I went into service. I was in ROTC, but of course they didn't have the record that I was in ROTC, so I was drafted. And I went from training to Germany, where I served, because of my background as an intelligence clerk, S2. And all the information on officers who had to be promoted from lieutenant to captain, and also for Germans who had to undergo checks for jobs on the base. So my job was to get the clearance through the FBI and to also report to my commander in terms of what was happening on the military part. I never went to the field. My job mostly in the office. Once they found out my background, I was taken off the truck that was going to into the fields. And from that time on, I stayed in the intelligence office. So I worked there in Germany for 2 years almost, and left and came back to Baltimore and took my first job teaching in Richmond County, Virginia, where I met my wife. First, she was a visitor at the high school, and that's when I got to meet her, because I was living with one of the teachers who had told me about her and asked me if I knew her, because I was living in Baltimore, and of course I had relatives in D.C. So by her visiting, I would take my English classes to Virginia State University, where she was attending, and there I met her on the campus, and she needed a quarter to go to a movie. So I let her have the quarter, and I told her she would have to pay me back, so I guess I had to marry her to get my quarter back. We joke about that. I was in Richmond County High School from 59 to 62. And it was hard for me to leave there, because with my background experience in cooking, and the person who was in charge of the cafeteria became ill, and she was in the hospital, so I had to take over the cafeteria. So then I had written the curriculum for French. They didn't have French at the school, so I was in charge of, I was chairman of the English department, and then I had to write the curriculum for French, and so they needed me there particularly because of the cafeteria, and I was a librarian. So, and I was only getting like $4,500 a year. So I met the young lady, and of course we made plans by visiting her, and she was, after she finished school. This picture was taken at Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. When Loretta Wright Williams became the wife of John J. Williams. The marriage ceremony was in June 16, 1962. And of course we married in 1962 when I moved from Virginia to District of Columbia. And I just stayed from district from 62 to 63, and I moved to Prince George's because my first job was at Fairmount Heights High School. Marvin Gaye was taking music from Mrs. Desi Smith, who was the one responsible for my getting the job, who's now deceased. Marvin Gaye was taking voice, and of course I came there as a French teacher. Fairmount Heights was a great experience for me because under G. James Golson, who was a marvelous principal and educator. In fact, I learned most of my education really from G. James Golson. Before the suit, there were only 2 high schools that you could attend, and the Douglas High School was more for the eastern part, 301, and Fairmount Heights, which had students coming from as far as Laurel, going to the north, and as far as Accokeek to the south. Now that's a long distance. Now Fairmount Heights was #1 in everything. We won 10 straight years of football. We were track for 10 straight years. We were chess. I can't count the years. We didn't have enough buses, so we had to have shifts to take the kids back and forth to school. And I had students who came from Accokeek, that's 21 miles one way, and so we had to spend extra hours after school to rotate the buses to bring the kids, take the kids home. And I saw the discrimination right there. In fact, and I also saw the fact that we were short of textbooks, and the books that I was getting, my kids came from Bowie High School, and I remember one of the parents taking the book to HEW, showing that we were getting hand-me-down books. Black kids could not ride the bus with white kids, and vice versa. So there was a separation of blacks and white, separation of the teachers. The teachers had the Black Teachers Association and a PTA, and there was a White Teachers Association. So Fairmount Heights was really a rallying ground, I guess, from my just being the boycott in Baltimore, the restaurant, to really get into the idea of suing the school board for segregated school. The name of the suit was the 1972 desegregation suit versus Prince George's County Schools. And the suit started with information from Jesse Ward. I have to give him the credit, who was on the school board. Organizing the suit actually started with me, but because I'm the only plaintiff who was working for the school board, we had to decide whether my name would be on the top and I would be, a sitting duck, so to speak. And of course, it took me from September until February to get NAACP to join us. NAACP at that time did not have a lawyer qualified for constitutional law. And so I had to go to Baltimore to get the state NAACP and get the law professor at University of Maryland Law School in Baltimore, and my brother, one of my fraternity brothers, to take the suit in Baltimore. Now, it was in February that finally we got Sylvester Vaughn to come to our meeting where the lawyers came to draw up the name for the suit, and it would have been Williams versus Board of Education, but because my wife felt that having that name at top and my being an employee, it wouldn't be too smart. So Sylvester Vaughn decided he would take the weight per se and put his name there, but the plaintiff wanted to put Williams and Vaughn, which was too long. So we just put Vaughn versus the Board of Education. So Williams alphabetically becomes at the bottom of the list. But the lawyers depended on Williams really because there was some in-house fighting going on with NAACP. So I had to keep them posted, and we met at North Inglewood Rec Center for most of our meetings. My greatest challenge in life, I guess, I imagine the challenge of dealing with the school board with the desegregation, because it was not just the school board, it was the state, the superintendent of school, and of course we had the president. So, I mean, you just don't, they say you can't win with City Hall. So that was a big challenge to go against the school board. And of course, I never believed that it would take 20 years. It took 24 years. In fact, it was, I think, the 21st to 22nd year that we finally signed the agreement to end the forced busing. But that was a challenge to let me know that if I could go against a school board and come out, I think, victorious, because what we have seen, in fact, I'm writing a book now called from how 9 black students changed the face of Prince George's County. And that book is going to reveal to you what happened 100 years ago, what happened since 1954, and what's happening now. Prince George is now, because of the busing, I would say, is the richest, the wealthiest African American county in the United States. And it just didn't happen. We know that the thing created a lot of dissatisfaction with whites. We lost an average of 5,000 white kids per year, which brought in blacks. And of course, I was offered a position on the school board, with the superintendent, had I played game with them. But I didn't want to be a sacrificial lamb for the Washington Post, and also if I had done that, I've been a traitor to the other plaintiffs and to the community. Now, we've seen Prince George's go. When I came to Prince George's, it was 15% minority. I think it's now about 78%. And the houses at that time, I paid like $15,000, $50,000. The houses today run from $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. There was no such thing during that time. There were no houses of $100,000 or $200,000 that black could afford. So we have moved from the segregation to resegregation in terms of economics, and that's still a challenge because we've moved from segregated by race to now segregated by economics. And so that's still a challenge. Well, I've always been inspired by Bill Cosby. And I got to really meet him. He's always inspired me. He's to the point, and he speaks the truth, even if someone thinks that he's wrong. I also was inspired by Roots, Alex Haley. I got to meet him and had my journalism class to meet him, and his bringing to life of the history really made me interested in finding more about my background and my history. And my son has already gone and done the DNA with Howard, so he was teaching at Howard, to find out where we came from. I had already had the family reunion. I got books showing that we started from a plantation of my great-great-grandfather, actually was a Cherokee Indian slave. But my son took it all even farther and found out that my relatives come from Africa. And so I've been inspired. I think those two, because I found out more about myself, and Alex Haley and Bill Cosby really give me inspiration in terms of education. Mr. Golson is another person, G. Jane Golson, who really, I think, trained me and made me kind of the educator I am today. Another person who inspired me was Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And when I started teaching in Virginia, I used to have an article in community newspaper. In every issue, I'll have some information telling you how not to worry. And it was Dr. Peale, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, and I actually got to meet his son. I was in Virginia Beach when I was working during the summer. But his ideology of believing in yourself and not to worry, and his philosophy really kind of made me the person I am today. And so I have used that to teach other kids about faith and believing in self. And I always say that, you know, if you believe what the mind can conceive, if you believe can be achieved. And that has been with me throughout my life, and I probably inspired a lot of people. I've had a radio show on WYCB for about 5 years, and I used it quite frequently, getting organized in young men leaders, a group that started at Fairmont High School. And most of those leaders have really become leaders. I have guys who are anchormen, young man Ricky McCullough, anchorman at Channel 4 News in Syracuse, and he produced movies and films, and I got people all over the world. I have 9 students I've taught who are principals now. In fact, the principal of Fairmont Heights now is one of my students. So that inspiration has really caused me to inspire others. In fact, one of the class has named a scholarship called the John J. Williams Scholarship, and which at one time I was trying to give people a little scholarship, and I ended up not having enough money to give 2 people who wanted the same thing. So now I have the money, which was like we give $1,000 a year, and when the class can't come up with the money, my wife and I put up the money. So we give at least $1,000 to either a young man or a young lady every year. Another way that I think I probably have impacted on the lives in Prince George's is I've organized an investment club. In fact, at my church, Shiloh Baptist Church, I organized 4 investment clubs. And the reason for that was because an investment club at that time, you couldn't have more than 25 in a club. And so we'll have club number 1, club number 2, club number 3 with the same name because you couldn't do it. And of course, when I became a producer of a radio show called Destiny, I organized other investment clubs. And I taught at Howard, Upward Bound program, for 10 years. We organized an investment club there. And in the community, we started a real estate investment club where we bought, in this community, 2 apartment buildings, which we sold by now. But investment is another thing that I implore all young people to get involved, learn the stock market and learn how to invest. And so my move from the investment moved on to my organizing my own subdivision. I have a subdivision in Virginia where my wife's home. We have 12 acres subdivided into about 10 lots, and that subdivision is Williams Estate, and with my son's names on the street. So then I've inspired with the young men at Fairmont Heights Chess Club. I co-sponsored the countywide chess, and we won many championships with the district schools and county. We were very active with chess, and of course, Fairmont Heights, I think now you're just seeing some chess clubs just beginning to develop, but we started countywide chess a long time ago. And then in church, I became not just a deacon, but I became the president of a sort of insurance program, which you call mutual aid. And that program gives to the beneficiary a certain amount of money at death. And we were doing so well that we used the money to invest, and the investment raised the money to a point where I was able to give other increments, to where we were only giving like for $1 a month, you get $300. I put one until you get $600 for $12, and you go and put $3 a month, you get $1,000. So that program is still going on. And then in addition to that, I found that Shiloh Memorial Garden, which is in Maryland National, that was the deal. I worked with the owner of the company to show him how, with the investment, he could build a mausoleum. So with my concept, he hired a person to full-time work to sell idea of buying lots from Baltimore and D.C., and that person made a living home out in Fort Washington. So that concept with the investment has always been part of me. And I've shown the kids every year how if you look in the newspaper every year, there are delinquent properties, and you can take a friend and go and first research and buy a piece of delinquent property and make enough money to send your kid to college. So every year I would tell my kids, tell your parents, and I would give them the paper, and they come out about now, that's March, around 1st of April, they have to advertise for 30 days. The sale is always in May, the second Tuesday in May, usually at the Board of Education building, and you go and bid on a piece of property. I know one guy from this community bidded on a piece of property, and he didn't know anything about bidding, and he paid $10,000, and he sold it for $100,000 because it was a water property that that the guy who owned it, he just wanted to get rid of it, but the guy held it, and now he's going around buying delinquent property. That's all. He's quit his job, so he's buying delinquent property all around the state. Just find a date and go around and usually buy delinquent property. But I think right now we're going to do a lot of delinquent property because of the housing problem. People are losing their homes because people are over. We're not challenging. We're not given the right information. So now we've got a big problem with foreclosures. To give you a viewpoint of Prince George's County before the desegregation, in 62, 65, there was no Landover Mall, there was no 490, 495, 490, and blacks had to attend drive-in movies. If you went to a movie, you had to go into D.C., and of course, as I told you, the school was segregated by race, and there was no swimming pool per se, like what we have today. We have the Teresa D. Banks pool, named after Teresa Banks, who was one of the leaders. But blacks did not have the opportunity to buy property or make a decent salary. There were no jobs, not really jobs. Most people worked in government or with the military. So if a young lady wanted to go, at the end of the year, wanted to go to a prom, or people wouldn't have the prom, it had to be in your gym. Fairmont Heights was always in a gym, where the others could go to a hotel. But we couldn't go to a hotel. There were no real restaurants that we could really go. We didn't have McDonald's and the fast foods at that time. And so actually, when I bought my house in North Inglewood, which is part of South Chevrolet, my deed said this house shall not be sold to a Negro, to Hispanic, or Jew. And Benedict said it, but because they'd been in violation, it would not be held against me. So you couldn't even buy houses in Chevrolet. You couldn't buy a house in Seat Pleasant. Blacks did not live in Seat Pleasant. And of course, we see the day now, almost all of Seat Pleasant is black. So there was a big difference from 60s to 70s. And of course, there were only two high schools in Prince George's County, and that was Frederick Douglass, out of Marlboro and 301. And Douglass had started really year with 11th grade, and of course Fairmont Heights was the first 12th grade. And Fairmont Heights, of course, opened in 1950, but even 1954, when the court suit said that separate but equal was not constitutional, 1974 we were still segregated, because 72 you see I'm starting to sue. So all those years we still did not have equality, and so life was not like it is today. I mean, young people today don't really know the history. They don't know what price has been paid for them to go to the pools and to get jobs and to have cars. It just didn't exist. The life for African American, black, was really on a scale that you really couldn't compare with the white, because they had the jobs, they had the places, the facilities, and we didn't. But not until the suit came did we begin to see a change. And it was not just a change in the school, but a change in housing and a change in politics. And that was one of the biggest things I saw as a problem when we started the suit. That was politics. And today, in 2008, the problem is politics. And you see the change even with Barack Obama running for president for the United States. The first time we've gotten a person to go that far. America is beginning to change, but you still see the race coming out gradually as we go through the campaign. So politics has always been the problem. There's no child left behind. We see the problem. I've taught ESOL kids, and I see the problem even with just trying to get them to pass the test. My job was to teach them so they could pass the test. And I know that the No Child Left Behind is penalized in school that should not be penalized, and they're not getting the funds they should be getting. So it's a big joke. And the problem still exists. And I think until we get a hand on politics and we begin to hold politicians accountable and not be afraid to go after people that we think cannot win, I think we need to make our minds made up and go forth. And when we see somebody like a Barack Obama, and I know Hillary Costov, she has done a lot with her husband, who was the president. But it's the first time we got a change. I think it made a big change, not only just change for the first African American president, but you give hope to African American young people who never dreamed they could even become a president. So now they get an idea, oh, it's possible.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
So it gives them that hope, going right back to Norman Vincent Peale, who said that anything you believe can be achieved if you believe. I would say that my greatest achievement is seeing the young people that I taught over 40 years become successful. I have ex-students who are millionaires. I have ex-students who are, at least 9 I know, who are principals. And I think my touch, just to be in as their advisor or teacher, has made a lot. But I will also say the desegregation of the public schools in Prince George's was probably another I can put my fingers on, because that impacted more lives than just the people that I taught. Because it really dealt with housing in the beginning, and also the whole philosophy. And so this desegregation suit, which lasted 20-some years, it's not finished, even though we have signed the agreement, because we moved from segregated schools to integrated school. It was not so much the integration that I was looking for at first. My concern was that we spend the money equally. We're looking at equal that the money would be spent equally, and so that if we do that, people would be able to buy houses, which was one of the problems, because they built schools in certain communities that if you didn't live in a community, you couldn't attend that school. And that has sort of been eliminated except for the fact that we've gotten to the point where you can't afford to buy some houses. And so politics was another area I think was great, because I ran for House of Delegate, and probably the first black to run on a ticket for the Democrat was Steny Hoyer, who is now a congressman, when he was in Annapolis. And of course, in this community with 15% black, there wasn't enough people. Now, people thought because I was only black on the ticket I would win. I lost by 132 votes. But then I was going to run again. And of course, Al Wynn wanted to run, hadn't gotten into politics. And he went to Steny, and Steny said, well, you got to see John Williams because he's our man. And my wife convinced me to get more active with the church because I had a Down syndrome son, and it was kind of concerned. She felt if I was in Annapolis, I wouldn't be here to help her. And so I took Al Wynn, who was my fraternity brother, and told him I talked with the family and showed him the ropes and went with him and worked with him till he became the first delegate. And from that on, the rest is history. Now, of course, you know that he lost the election, but I opened the door for Al Wynn, as well as bringing Jesse Jackson to this area. In fact, I tell you, Jesse was my guest speaker at Shiloh for mutual aid, and I had him come twice and pick him up from the airport, take him to the hotel, and he actually set up a headquarters in Washington, where my pastor became the chairman of the Washington Push, because he wanted to get some contact with the government people. So those are two situations that I think I could add to individuals I could put my finger on as part of my development. Well, for young people today, I would leave the idea that in order to know yourself, you must know your history. And two, often I go to speak before groups, and I find out they don't know their background, they don't know their history. And imagine, because we have Black History Month, it used to be Black History Week, now we've got 1 month, you know, and then during that 1 month, now of course, it depends on the teacher whether you even get, you know, 1 month. So knowing your history is very important, because you don't know what price others have paid for you to get to where you are. And that's important for you to get at least an idea of where you're going. So young people, you need to look at that. The other thing is, there is so much going for you today in terms of scholarships. We have I have an essay contest just ended on the Geno 6. And I have 2 students who've written beautiful articles, and they're going to get some great awards. But the SAT workshop, which we have the fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, which I'm a member, I'm a very active member, I'm a 5th year member. We have free workshops in April every year, and we have 200, 300 students. And we also have workshops for the parents showing them how to get money for the students. So I've had students who were making $700, $800, who end up making $1,300, $1,400. And I have one young lady who is now working on her doctorate. And one couple has received 3 scholarships, and they're married with a kid, and they both working on their doctorate. So going to college is going to be almost a must, because the education we get today will not be enough when you, in fact, there are a lot of kids who come out of college will probably looking for jobs this year. But we got to blame that on the government, Mr. Bush, President Bush, this whole situation created now. But you got to have faith. You got to believe that this is just temporary. All I say, when you have a problem, say to yourself, this is just temporary. There's only one thing that's permanent. It's not taxes, because wealthy people they find a way to get around taxes. And I don't think you can call it death, because we say there's life after death. We know why I talk about going to heaven. But what is it? And I tell my kids every year, and I've taught for the past 40-some years, I don't know how many kids I taught 10 years at Howard Outward Bound program. There's only one thing that's permanent. And when you see what that is, it will give you hope. That one thing is change. When problems come to you, beset you, you only say, this is temporary. And you look at it as temporary. You're not going to be the same person 5 years from now. I'm not the same person I was 40 years ago. And when you see some of the pictures with my bush, you would say, oh, that's not the same person. But you got to believe in yourself. You got to believe in yourself. And you got to say when problems come that it's temporary. Because life is temporary. There's no way that we can say it's permanent. Because if it's permanent, then you're lost. And if you look at everything as temporary, if it's temporary, if you're on the bottom, there's only one way to go. That's up. Now if you're up, you be careful because you can go down. So when you have problem people, young people, just say it's temporary and you believe that you can change. And that's what this whole presidential thing is about with Obama is change. And so we need change, and the only way you can become who you are, who you want to be, is to change. You can't stay the same, and you must dream, as Martin Luther King said.